Coming up on The Returned.
To the surgical room. They pop the doors open. They slide me over onto the surgical table. And before they gave me any medication, I look to my right and Jesus walks into the surgical room. And I was like, what the heck? And I kind of looked back around to see what the rest of the room, and it just all started kind of just to disappear. Everything just turned white. And Jesus walks up to me and he says, and this is like a physical person walking in the room. He wasn't floating. It wasn't a ghost. It was like a physical person walking in that room. He holds out his hand and he says, I want to answer your prayer.
Hi, and welcome to The Returned. Here's to everything we'll discover together. Hi, and welcome to The Returned, a place where we share near-death stories, out-of-body experiences, spiritual awakenings, signs from spirit, and the journey of healers and lightworkers from around the world. If you enjoy this type of content, please like, subscribe, and share to make sure you don't miss out on an episode. Today, I'm honored to sit down with Mike McKinsey. On August 9th, 2004, he had a near-death experience, and what he encountered was more vivid, more real than anything he'd ever known in this world. Today, Mike shares the unforgettable details of the day that he died. Mike, welcome to The Return.
Thank you, MJ. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, you are so welcome. Mike, do you think that we could start at the beginning? Can you take us back to that day, August 9th, 2004? What do you remember about that day and when you went to the hospital?
Well, I was at my son's wedding. We had to travel about 5 hours away from our home. So we got there on a Wednesday, and then I played a little baseball with my kids in the park before all the festivities started and all the out-of-town people got there. They were really into baseball. All my kids were. And so I did a lot of swinging a bat that I don't normally do, a little bit too much physical activity, I think, because that night I started feeling sick, but I just kind of passed it off as I was getting the flu. And I just started saying, God, don't let me get the flu. My son's wedding is in 3 days on Saturday. Thursday, I got even worse. And then Friday, I was so bad. We had the rehearsal dinner to go to Friday night, and I was just feeling miserable. I mean, by then I was running a pretty high fever. I was sweating and just really uncomfortable. So we got through the rehearsal dinner, and that night I didn't sleep at all. Like, I stayed awake all night long because my stomach was so upset. But my son was in the medical field. So after all the guests left from the rehearsal dinner, he and I were sitting at the bar having a glass of wine, and he says, hey, maybe it's your appendix, Dad. Do you still have your appendix? And I said, well, yeah, I do, but I don't have that point tenderness thing they always say you have, where you just touch that one spot and it's painful. I don't have that. I think I just got the flu. And he says, well, after the wedding tomorrow, maybe you should go get checked out. So that's what I did. We got through the wedding, and by then I was really miserable, not sleeping for 24 hours, going through my son's big day. And then after the wedding was over, some of the guests started leaving, and he told me what hospital to go get checked out at. So I went to the hospital, and it's Saturday night, pretty big town. So it's, hospital rooms, the emergency room is just packed. And I'm sitting there just, ready to pass out, falling asleep, just feeling so miserable. They finally call me back. The nurse lays me down on this table, and she's poking around. She says, well, I think it's your appendix. And I said, no, I don't think so. I think I got the flu. I'm telling the nurse what's wrong with me. And she's doing all these tests, and she takes some blood and sends it off to the lab. She did this one test that kind of freaked me out because she took one of those mallets that they tap your knee, to check your reflexes, and she tapped the bottom of my foot. And she says, does that hurt? And I kind of laughed. I said, no, of course not. Well, she tapped the other foot, and I had pain in my abdomen that made me scream. And she says, okay, that's your appendix. I'm going to call a surgeon. It sounds like your appendix have probably ruptured. Have you done any physical activity lately? And I said, well, I played baseball with my kids in the park on Wednesday. And her expression went from wow to, oh my gosh, she's going Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. This is Saturday night. She says, if your appendix ruptured on Wednesday, we got to get you back there quick because you're in a little trouble. So she called in the surgeon. He showed up probably half an hour later. He's poking around in my abdomen. He says, yeah, it sounds like your appendix have ruptured. We'll get you back there. He says, if they haven't, you'll go home in a day or two. If they have, you'll be here for 3 or 4 days. And I thought, okay, no problem. So I go back to they wheel me into the surgical room. They pop the doors open. They slide me over onto the surgical table. And I look to my right before they put a mask on me, before they gave me any medication. I look to my right and Jesus walks into the surgical room. And I was like, what the heck? And I kind of looked back around like to see what the rest of the room. And it just all started kind of just to disappear. Everything just turned white. And Jesus walks up to me and he says, this is like a physical person walking in the room. He wasn't floating. It wasn't a ghost. It was like a physical person walking in that room. He holds out his hand and he says, I want to answer your prayer. And now I'm even more confused because I'm like, my prayer, before I went to the hospital, I was praying that everything would go well, and it doesn't seem like it's going to now. If Jesus is here, I'm thinking I must be dead. So after, I'm trying to make sense of all this stuff, I grab his hand. As soon as I touch his hand, we're standing on a mountain. There's green grass below my feet, and it was just beautiful, like perfectly manicured, dark green. But everything else around me was white. And my senses were heightened to the point where I could count every single blade of grass that was touching my feet. It was amazing. I knew how many blades of grass were touching my feet instantly. But everything else around me was white, like this blinding white. I could still see Jesus' hand, but it was just so bizarre. And there's this like a basketball sized light that's round off in the distance, and it's kind of shimmering. So everything's blinding white, so I can't see. But this thing is a different white. It's kind of shimmering white. And it starts sending off these little light beams. Like they look like fluorescent tubes. They're a couple feet long. They're a little fatter than the fluorescent lights. But they start coming at me, and they're going by my head. Actually, one of them hits me in the forehead. And as it goes through me, it warmed me like right down to my toes. And it was just this beautiful feeling. And it made kind of a light buzzing sound when it went through my head. And I'm looking at this thing going, man, what is going on here? Jesus is still standing there. I'm still holding his hand. And then I look as I'm trying to focus on that round light, that shimmering light with these things going by me. All of a sudden, all the white in front of my face gets pulled like it was a curtain, and somebody pulled it from my right to my left. And so now all the white's gone, and I'm looking at this beautiful scenery. I'm standing on this hill, and now I can see down past the grass. The grass gives way to these little beautiful flowers, and they're kind of, they're like all pastel colors, and they're sort of, moving like there's wind, but there's no wind. And at the bottom of this hill, there's this huge city, like just, miles across. And, but now that fog or what that veil, whatever that white stuff was that was in front of me, that curtain that got pulled, is now settled on top of that city. So all I can see is rooftops sticking through. It's like it's enveloped in fog. And I noticed that there's a big giant golden dome almost in the center of this huge city. There's other gold domes sticking through this fog. And there's a bunch of like white roofs too. And there was a lot of like white steeples. They look like church steeples. But one of the things that I noticed when I'm looking at this is that there are no crosses at the top. I thought that was kind of weird. And then on the other side of this city, there's another mountain that goes up, and this mountain's huge, and it's covered in these beautiful pine trees. They're all like perfectly shaped. They're beautiful green, light greens, dark greens, just like the most beautiful mountainside I've ever seen. And then above that is this sky that is, it's like the most beautiful sunset I've ever seen, but there's no sun. So there's all these colors like reds and oranges and yellows, but they're like super bright and vibrant. And above all those colors is like brightest blue I've ever seen. There's some little wispy clouds blowing. It's just like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And then now these light beams, the one that hit me in the head and were going by me, now they're going across the valley above the city. And one of those light beams hits the tip of one of the trees. And it's like the tip of the tree had a diamond on it, because when that light beam hit it, it just burst into these hundreds of tiny little light beams, like a fireworks, but it was all white. And more of them hit the tips of the trees. And when they hit the tips of the trees, it was just popping everywhere with this, this white, brilliant white color with that background of the sky, the colors. It was just amazing. And I look back to where those things were coming from, and Jesus says to me, "It's the glory of the Lord." And when he said that, I just was so overcome with emotion. I got weak in my knees, and I fell to my knees. And as soon as my knees hit the ground, that's when they shocked me and they brought me back. So now, instead of this beautiful scenery, I have a doctor standing over me with a mask on. And he says, "Do you know your name?" And I'm really confused now, because I'm like, man, where's the beautiful scene? Where's Jesus? You know? Um, and I tried to answer him, but I answered like in my mind. I thought he could hear me. And he says, "Do you know your name?" He says it again. And I said, "Mike." And I could barely talk because my throat was so dry. I was still, now I'm hot again and miserable and sweaty. And he says, "Do you know where you are?" And the city that we were in is Ventura, California. And so I said, I had to think for a minute. Son's wedding, and, I'm backtracking all this stuff. And I said, "Yeah, I'm in Ventura." And he says, "Okay, he's back." And now I realize that there's like 5 or 6 other people in the room. I look around. One of these people is putting this crash cart back together. Their nurses are all wearing blue scrubs, and they all start filing out of the room. A couple of them stayed there, and the doctor says, "Let's get them up to ICU." So I spent 4 days in ICU and about 12 days in the hospital. I had a lot of complications to get better, but uh, finally survived and got out. Now there is actually more to the story. A couple months ago, I guess it was about 8 or 9 months ago, I was reading an online comment because everybody wants to try and explain what happened to me. When you go public with a story like this, a lot of people will say, "Well, it was just hallucination. It was this, it was a dream. It was, medication." And one of the comments that I read, and you may not have heard this part yet because they just started telling this half of the story. One of the comments said, it was just a hallucination brought on by your high temperature. And I thought, well, the second part of the story is Jesus showed up again 24 hours later in the hospital room and sat down in my room, and I had a 3-hour conversation with him, which was the most
Wow.
bizarre thing. I mean, I thought this NDE was really cool. This was straight up bizarre. And so when I got out of the hospital, I went home and I told my friends the story. It took me actually 3 days to tell my wife because I'd just cry every time I'd open my mouth. I mean, you can see it. It still makes me choke up 20 years later. I sat down with a friend on my couch, and this is a 45-year-old man, and he's holding my hand. And as I'm telling this story, I'm crying like a baby, and he's crying right along with me. And then I got to the part where I said, "Yeah." And then 24 hours later, Jesus came back and I had a 3-hour conversation with him. His expression went from, "Wow, that's the most amazing thing," to, "Dude, you're crazy. You must have had
Oh,
brain damage," And after I got that same reaction from 5 or 6 of my friends. And after a half a dozen of them, I actually heard Jesus whisper in my ear, "You don't have to tell this part yet." And so I was almost relieved because I thought people are going to think I'm crazy. They're not going to, I'm losing credibility here. They're not going to believe me. And so I just stopped telling that part. So back to the comment that I was reading, I read the comment that said it was just hallucination brought on by a high temperature. I heard Jesus in an audible voice say in my ear, "Now's the time to tell your story. Tell the whole story. Hold nothing back. the world is ready, and so are you. And so,
That is absolutely beautiful. You almost made me cry there. I was almost crying anyways earlier, but now I just feel, wow. Wow.
yeah. So, I figured, okay, the world's ready. Back when this happened, we didn't have YouTube channels talking about NDEs. YouTube was all music videos back then. I mean, that was about it. So the world's ready. I think the world's more receptive to Jesus now. Especially now, especially with this, it feels like there's this big revival happening in our country. I don't know about where you are, but here it's like everybody is just really hungry for Jesus. And yeah, uh, and I thought,
It's interesting, if I may, I'm sorry to interrupt you
sure,
there.
sure,
Um, I'll be honest with you, and I just wanted to say this. Well, when I had mine, I was afraid to tell people that Jesus came. I was afraid. And well, when I did, the two people that I did tell, they basically laughed.
yeah,
And I was
yeah,
like, "Oh." And so when I'm just trying to empathize what I can imagine that you went through, because I also similarly went through something like that. And it made me, so when I first started telling my story, I would just say a man. But I knew exactly who it was, but I was again afraid.
yeah,
I was afraid. I don't even know why I was afraid. But I understand and empathize with that. And I told mine, and it's time for you to tell yours, and
yeah, yeah,
it's time.
exactly.
And it
Yeah,
doesn't
see,
matter
I
what
mean, at
people
the
think.
at the time when I started telling that story and I got that reaction, I thought, geez, I mean, if I tell that, my guys at work, I worked as a superintendent for a real estate development company, and I had all these
Yes.
subcontractors working for me. I thought they're not going to respect me; they're going to think I'm nuts, you know. But so I just shut up about it. I told a few friends about the NDE, but then when God said, "You are ready," I thought, what changed in me? Well, I got bold in sharing my faith. I don't care if people call me crazy now. I have a
Exactly.
lot more empathy for people because I look at people and I think, you need Jesus. You're one of those people that I pray for. You're an unbeliever. And, I just hope that everybody that hears my story realizes that, man, we're all going to die. We're going somewhere. We were made
Yes,
to
yes, we
live
are.
forever. And
That's
we're not
right.
going to live forever in this body, thank goodness.
That's
I'm
right.
ready to give mine up
Yeah,
and get a
right?
glorified body.
I
Uh,
agree.
but yeah, so
So, so
he
when he
changed me
talked
and he
to you
changed the world.
after, what happened? What did he
So what
say?
happened?
What did you feel like?
Uh, the first thing. So what happened was, I developed pneumonia. 24 hours later, I woke up at 2 in the morning in ICU, and they had I was so weak I couldn't pick my hands up off my chest. So I'm laying there, and the nurses had put the call button in my hands on my chest. And I woke up and I couldn't breathe. I mean, I was really fighting to get my breath. I felt like I was breathing through all this vapor, like there was water in my lungs. And I rang the nurse, and she comes in, and I said, I can't breathe. And she listens, and I'll never forget her words. She listened with a stethoscope, and she says, "Oh, honey, you're developing pneumonia." And my first thought was, oh man, that's why Jesus showed me heaven, because he wants to comfort me because I'm not going to make it. I waited too long to go to the hospital, and I'm going to die. And so she called in all these other nurses, and they packed me in ice. They gave me oxygen, blowing right into my nose. They gave me this thing to breathe into, a spirometer, to try and clear my lungs. And so as all these people are leaving, she checked my temperature too. It was still over 104. So, you know, I thought that, I'm still really, really sick. But they put me in ice. They put all these ice blankets on me. And she says that should bring your temperature down. So the funny part about it is that comment that I read that said hallucination because of a high fever. I thought, okay, maybe it was. I was questioning the whole thing. But then an hour later, the nurse takes my temperature. And this is when Jesus was talking to me in the room. I'll get to that in just a second.
No problem.
Uh, she checked my temperature and it was down to 100. So that's not high enough to give you hallucination. So when all the nurses were leaving, when I had pneumonia, I felt this holy presence enter my hospital room. And it was like overwhelming. And as they leave, I I feel Jesus' presence. Now this time I couldn't see him. It wasn't like a physical person, but I knew he was there. I could just feel him sitting down at my bed, and he says to me, and this is in an audible voice that the nurse couldn't hear. That's what made it so crazy. He said, I had to get you flat on your back away from all the distractions so you could hear me. And I was like, whoa, all the distractions, you know? And then I started thinking about my job was super stressful. My life was just so stressful. You know, having the responsibility of having these 30 to 35 houses in different phases of construction going on. It was a super stressful job. They paid me great, but it was almost not worth it, you know? So I lasted there a couple more years and then I had to leave because it was just too stressful. Um, he told me a lot of things. He said, I'm going to ask more of you. And, he said, our story is going to be heard by millions. And when he said that, I laughed. I said, nope, you got the wrong guy. I am not Billy Graham. I'm not going to go talk to a stadium full of people about Jesus. I'm sorry, but you got the wrong guy. I'm not going to do it. And he just kind of chuckled. And he knew what was coming. You know, he was preparing me, but it took 20 years to get me ready. But like I said, I got bold in my faith. And now I'm like, I don't care if people call me crazy. This is what happened.
Exactly.
You
This
know,
is what
believe it or
happened.
not, this is exactly what happened. And I told him I would tell the story. And so here it is.
You know, you had an extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary experience. And I agree with Jesus. It does not matter what people think. I wanted to touch back for a moment just so I can, you know, get a real good understanding. Was I right? Of course, I can't see what I'm writing. It happens every time. Like, my goodness. I wanted to know when Jesus walked in, what did he look like to you?
Um, I was a little, I was a little shocked by his appearance. I mean,
Oh,
as a kid growing up in North America, I was always shown a blonde haired, blue eyed Jesus.
okay.
And people laugh at that now. They go, how
I
could you
didn't
not?
even know that myself.
Yeah,
Really?
well, that's what I was shown in the kids' Bible stories and all that. It was blonde haired, blue eyed Jesus. He looked like me. And
Okay.
so when he walked in, he looked like an Arab man. You know, he had dark skin. He had a short beard. He had dark brown, wavy hair. His eyes were green, but with a kind of a bluish tint, bluish green. And like when his eyes looked into my eyes, he looked into my soul. He knew me. And I just knew that it was Jesus instantly. And, you know, I don't know why I never really questioned what he looked like because to me, it didn't really matter. You know, this is Jesus. He's the guy that died for me. He paid the price for my sins, and I don't care what he looks like. So I never really questioned it. As I grew up, I just always thought, you know, whatever he looks like doesn't matter. But it's funny because everybody asks me about his appearance, and they say, well, of course he looks like a Middle Eastern guy. That's where he lived, you know. But I never really gave it much thought.
I asked only because that's who I saw as well.
Hmm,
That same appearance, yes.
that's awesome.
So, yeah, and I like people to know. I've had many people lately asking me what he looked like. Um, but that's what I saw as well.
You know, I
So,
think that a lot of people are curious because that Shroud of Turin and now AI has made the picture. People send me that all the time, and they say, is this what Jesus looked like?" And I'm like,
oh, I
"Yeah,
haven't
not
seen
really."
it.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's out there. You should Google it. It's
I will.
interesting, but it didn't the likeness. I mean, there were some similarities to me, but I'm like, yeah, not really.
You know, I get that because I still like I just did a video just telling my story and I had just used AI to just kind of get the feeling for people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I put on there it's AI. It's not exact. Um but I remember going through all the pictures. I couldn't get that exact look. And yeah, it's interesting. So when you took his hand, did you have a physical feeling? Did it feel like you were just touching, like, say, your wife's hand or your child's hand when you took his hand?
It was Yeah, it was like holding another person's hand. Yeah. There was nothing
Interesting.
strange about, but uh, the love that I felt from him when he walked in that room was overwhelming. I mean, it just almost made me cry. I mean, I lose it when I talk about Jesus now, but that was not me back 20 years ago. So that was one of the
Really?
things that Jesus changed. He softened me. He softened my heart. But when I touched his hand, it was like a physical hand, like a physical person, like holding my brother's hand or my dad's hand.
Yeah.
It was a
Were
physical person.
were you religious prior to that experience?
I was raised in a Christian household. My mom dragged us to church as kids, every Sunday. Um, and well, I have four kids, and so I joined churches and we moved around a lot. So we didn't really have a home church, but we did go to a church at the time that this happened. I had been going there for probably 3 or 4 years. But I would consider myself like a Sunday Christian, like just kind of casual. Church was something you did on Sunday, and then the rest of the week you just didn't think about Jesus or God or any of that stuff. I just didn't put anything into practice. I mean, I was a good person. I did a lot of coaching of kids, so I was a good role model. I ran a lot of organizations for athletics and stuff like that. But no, I wouldn't say I was religious. It just didn't really resonate with me.
I
Didn't have a lot of
understand
meaning.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah. And now it does,
sure
especially
does.
now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So when you left with Jesus by the hand, what did you feel? Did you feel anything?
Other than the love, I was just like overwhelmed with what I was seeing. I just kept saying, "Wow, this is wow, unbelievable." Yeah, it was just overwhelming. Yeah.
And you that was I'm your soul that went with him because you were still on
Yeah,
the operating table,
I was still
right?
on the operating table. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they did the appendectomy. They cleaned me out and sewed me
And
up.
you weren't there
And
for any of it.
no, no, I checked out.
Isn't that something? Totally
Yeah, it's
checked out
weird
and
how
you
that
felt
happened.
nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, especially when you say not weird. I shouldn't say weird, but when you say everything kind of turned white
Hmm.
and you just kind of floated in, almost like you just went boom, right through a door. Like no big deal. It's so interesting. This is just so interesting.
Hmm.
When you did get to the other side with Jesus and you started to see the cities and all that, do you personally think that that's where we go when we die?
I'm not sure if like everybody lands in the same place.
Yeah, of course.
I kind of figure that that's what I needed to see. There is part of this that I haven't told you yet. As a kid, I went to my grandfather's funeral when I was about 5 years old, and I remember the priest talking about my grandpa's name was Pete. Pete's in a better place now. He's in heaven. There's no more tears. There's no sorrow. There's, what a beautiful place it is. And I remember talking to God and saying, God, that sounds like a really cool place. Can you show me? And that became like a nightly prayer for me for years. I would always ask God, show me heaven. And he took 40 years to answer that prayer. It was actually 40 years later that he said, okay, I'm going to show you heaven.
Do you think that that was something that was actually planned for you to see at that time in your life?
It must have been. I mean, I've had so many things happen that, I question at the time, and then later I'll get some assurance from God that, yeah, this was all part of the plan. I think that he's had his hand in my life for a long time, but I just didn't give him the credit or acknowledge it.
See, when you say that, and for an outsider, listening to that, it excuse me, it makes me think that you were supposed to remember that, and you just kept remembering that you wanted to see heaven from
Yeah,
a little boy. And
yeah,
then 40 years later, now it's your time
yeah,
to see heaven. And
yeah.
where I was going with that question about do you think that where you went, is that heaven? Like, not saying that we're all going to that exact place, but do you think that's what heaven looks like for us? Like,
I
does it
think,
have cities? Does it have these, buildings?
yeah, I really think that What Jesus showed me was the New Jerusalem, the city that he's going to come down. He's going to bring that back to earth and live here forever when he remakes the
I
earth.
see.
That's my personal belief.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of cities in heaven. Like I've seen people that say, "Well, I don't want to live in the city. If living in the city is that's not heaven for me. I want to live in the country." Well, I think there's plenty of country too. So we're not going to all live in the city. Um, but yeah.
So I want to just step back from those light beings, those light, sorry, they weren't beings, but they were light bolts or they were
Hmm.
light something, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it hit you in the head. Do you think that light healed you? Have you
Wow.
ever thought of that?
I've never thought of that. No, it's
The way you
it's
described it going
possible.
through
Yeah.
your body
Hmm.
and the warmth that you were
Hmm.
describing to me brought to mind, I wonder if that healed him.
Hmm. It certainly could
I
be.
mean, it could. We don't know for
Yeah.
sure, but
Yeah.
I mean, I was really just wondering if you ever thought about that because that's a very interesting, when you said that it warmed your body. That sounds
Yeah.
like
Warm
healing
and
to
very
me.
comfortable. Yeah. It could be. Nobody's ever asked me that. They've always asked me like, "What do you think they were?" And I have no idea. I don't know what those things were. I just think that it was all part of the glory of the Lord. When I was a
Yeah.
kid too, like a couple years after the whole grandfather situation and the prayer that I started praying, I used to watch that Charlie Brown Christmas special,
Oh, yeah.
every year. And I remember there was one part where Linus comes out with his blanket and he tells the story of Luke and he says, the glory of the Lord shone all around them. And that's another thing I remembered as a kid, like, wow, the glory of the Lord, what must that look like? That's got to be pretty cool. Kind of like to see that too, Lord, show me. And, and so he answered two prayers, two childhood prayers in one trip. Pretty amazing.
Wow. More than amazing. More than amazing. I don't even think there's words for that, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah.
Right? You're very
Yeah, that he
fortunate.
didn't forget. He, logged that as a prayer that I'm going to get to later. Can't answer that now, but I will later.
See, there's a good, takeaway for people. Don't give
Oh,
up on your prayers, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
They will be answered. I mean, yours took 40 years,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
got it, right?
Yeah. And what's 40 years to God?
Nothing. It's probably
Yeah.
like minutes, I'm pretty sure. It probably
Yeah.
felt like you were there for so long,
Yeah. It
you
did.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think, and what did you think about when you seen buildings with no crosses on them?
I asked somebody that I knew was really religious shortly
Mhm.
after that. I said, why didn't I see crosses? I mean, if I was shown a city in heaven, if I went to heaven, Jesus answered my prayer. Why weren't there crosses? Because every church steeple on earth has a cross
Yeah.
on top. I'm just about. And they told me we don't celebrate the cross in heaven because you think about what Jesus said on the cross. He said, it's finished. So when you get to heaven, you don't need to be reminded of that sacrifice because it's done. So we don't celebrate the cross in heaven. Made sense.
Yeah, that does make sense, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Did you did you feel or have any did you hear any sounds or smell anything when you were there? Was there a specific smell or did you hear like music or something?
Hear music. And, I thought about it. I mean, laying flat on my back for 12 days in the hospital gives you a lot of time to think. I always thought, well, why didn't I hear birds or, birds chirping, or I didn't even hear wind. The little flowers were kind of dancing. I didn't hear wind. I didn't feel wind. So I didn't smell anything, but I just remember being comfortable, just like, and in awe of everything. So yeah, I think there's more to what was there that I didn't need to see to satisfy that prayer. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
Jesus was saying, I can't reveal it all to you because you're going back in a couple of minutes. I'll just show you that it's real and I'm real and I'll
Yes.
be with you from now on. And that was the thing that he said when he left my room at 5 o'clock in the morning. This happened that visit happened 2 o'clock till 5 o'clock. It was 3 hours. Um, and he said, let's keep in touch, which I thought was unusual, but it's like that's what we say to people. Hey, let's keep in touch.
Yeah, I mean, what do we expect him to actually talk like, though, too? Right? So if
Yeah,
you think about it for real, though, like, of course he would probably talk like us, right?
yeah, yeah. He was just like my best friend,
Yeah.
just having a conversation. Yeah.
Have you ever talked to him again since that time?
I have heard, audible voices. I've heard his audible voice, a few times, probably 15 or so, more than a dozen actual audible voices. And I almost always get proof that it was him within like 24 hours. I had kind of a funny incident happen. If you want me to tell you a quick story,
Sure. Absolutely.
I bought a huge house about 6 months ago and we're renovating it, and it just takes up a lot of my time. And I mean, it was a mess. And believe me when I say this is not your regular fixer. This thing was a dump, but it's the biggest house in the most beautiful neighborhood, and we just had to jump on it. So we're working on it. So before I moved into this house, I was there working by myself, and I brought a couple of tools with me. And I was really frustrated this one day. I couldn't find a screwdriver that I needed, and I only had one screwdriver on the job because all my tools were back at my other house about an hour away. So I just started praying. I go, Lord, I need help finding this screwdriver. And I hear this audible voice say, "It's in your truck." And I was like, "What?" And I hear it again. "It's in your truck." And here's, how frustrated I was. I go, "It's not in my truck." Because I thought, I don't take that tool home with me. I don't take tools home. I leave them at the job. And then I thought, what are you doing? This is God's helping you. You better go look in the truck. So I walked out there, just kind of prove him wrong, right? I walk out there and I look through the window and I go, it's not there. So I walked in and I thought, man, you just need to, you're just getting too stressed out. You need to just settle down. So I thought, it's lunchtime. I'm going to eat the sandwich that I packed. And so I sit down, and as I'm eating this sandwich, it's almost like a movie screen appeared in front of my face, this huge movie screen. And this movie starts playing, and it's me working the day before with the screwdriver, holding the screwdriver. And I'm standing on a ladder, and I take the screwdriver and I put it in my pocket as I'm getting down. My pocket's in my jeans. And then it kind of fast forwards to me getting in my truck at the end of the day. And I sat down in my truck, and the screwdriver poked me when I sat down. And I took it out of my pants and I put it in my center console in my truck. And I thought, oh, that's where the screwdriver is. I put the sandwich down. I walked outside. I opened up my door, and I opened center console, and there's my screwdriver. And I just felt so bad. I mean, I got on my knees and I was like, I'm really sorry, Lord. I should know better than to question you. I just need to pay attention and listen. So it's just an example of, how, like, I talk to Jesus all the time, and I don't always hear the audible voice, but that time I did, and I questioned it, and I was just it's just a dummy. I should pay attention. But he likes being involved in every little detail of my life now. And I think it's that way with everybody,
I
but
think
we
so.
just kind of,
Hmm.
we just sort of pass it off as, I'll talk to God on Sunday.
Do you think that people have to be ready for that kind of communication with Jesus?
I think one of the things that happened during the NDE is that I like, people say, well, the veil is thinner now, but I think I've developed a relationship with Jesus where I know his voice, and I know he's with me all the time. So, you know, it, one bit of advice that I always give people is build a relationship. How do you build a relationship with people? You communicate. You keep talking, and they talk to you, you talk to them. Maybe in the beginning you won't be able to hear his voice, but as time goes on, you'll start saying, "Oh, that must have been the voice of God that telling me these things." So I think the better relationship you have, um, the easier it is to hear his voice.
You know, I agree with you there. I started this YouTube channel out of a calling, out of a voice that I actually heard as well. So I did what came to me. But one night I was frustrated, and I had woken up in the middle of the night, and one night I was frustrated, and I was I wasn't talking out loud. My husband was sleeping, so I was being quiet. But in my head, I was just saying, I don't know if I can do this YouTube thing, talking to myself. Well, out of nowhere came a voice. Audible. It was almost vibrational and it was powerful, but it wasn't mean. It was just very powerful. I mean, ever present maybe. And it just said, don't stop, keep going. And I just kind of went, oh, I laid back down, rolled onto my left side and went in my head, went, okay. And I just dropped it. I left it at that. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to keep going. Not that I wanted to give up. It was just that it's taxing. It's different and it's new. You know what I mean? But obviously someone was listening. Mike, how did you end up coming back and how was that for you?
Well, they shocked me, brought me back. It was a rough recovery. I lost 35 pounds in 12 days in the hospital. I developed an abscess along with, once I got over the pneumonia, the germs form an abscess, and the surgeon said, they basically try to finish you off. The surgeon actually told me, he said the next day when he came in to see me, he said that was the worst case I've ever seen. And this is he was almost 70 years old. And then he told me, he says, well, it wasn't actually the worst case. He said, I've seen worse, but the patient didn't live. And he says, he actually said to me, God's not done with you yet. So
Right.
coming back, it was tough. And in the I wrote a book to tell the whole story, the part one and part two. And that one of the funniest parts in it is the abscess surgery where they go in to get suck out the rest of the germs. It's quite interesting, and it was very painful, but it was funny too. Yeah.
I bet. How has your NDE changed the way you see life, your faith, or even the idea of death itself?
Well, the one thing, I mean, I'm not afraid of death, but I've always kind of described death like this. I always say death is like moving. I'm not looking forward to the process, but I am excited about the destination. So, the dying process, yeah, you can kind of count me out of that. I don't need to be part of that. I hope I go quickly in my sleep. So I'm not afraid of death, and that the NDE changed me. And some people, they have this NDE and they come back and they say, I'm completely different instantly. I'm completely changed. Didn't happen with me, and I think that was because the attacks of the enemy saying, you're an idiot. Don't tell this story. And I didn't for a long time. Like, 8 years later, I wrote a book, but I wrote it as fiction. And then like 20 years later, and this is so interesting, the way this whole thing came about for me to go public with my story. The publication company Guideposts contacted me out of the blue 20 years later, or I think it was like 19 years, but whatever, 20 years later. And they said, we want to use your NDE in a story. Would you like to talk to one of our authors and have them write it? And I said, yeah, sure. So I figured it was done, but God said, no, we haven't had millions of eyes on your story yet, on our story. So let's kind of revive it and get it going, because the world's ready. So are you. So they put my story in one of their books, and I did a little marketing for them, and I, talked to a podcaster, and that led to
Yeah.
several others and
Yeah.
led to us. So
Yeah, it's so wonderful. So that must have been different for you as well, hey? To
yeah,
be
yeah.
like, that must have been so different from what you were used to, and then getting all this attention. What did you feel like?
Uh, I, I wasn't real comfortable at first. Um, you know, like I didn't like talking to crowds of people, let alone talking about Jesus. I just didn't like it. I was a construction guy. But one of the things that God did to me was kept putting me in front of larger and larger crowds and getting more comfortable talking to a lot of people. And, through sports activities and the organizations I was running, I was talking to, first I would talk to all the team parents. There's 20 people, and then pretty soon I'm talking to, you know, 300 or 400 people at a time, and just got comfortable. And then God says, okay, you're ready with that part. Now I want you to start talking to him about me. And, he just, I don't know, just kind of grew me up a little bit, got me used to doing that. And yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
When I hear you say that, Mike, I think about myself and keep throwing myself in this, but because since I started this podcast, it seems like everybody I meet mirrors something I should be seeing. I'm serious. And I never was a person that liked to do public speaking or be out in the front. It makes me nervous. I remember at work, I got good at it at work. It was different. It grows on you. But doing this YouTube was a big thing. But I actually, when I started, I felt what you just said was he kept putting me in this. It was my turn to be facing this now. It was almost like I was facing a fear. And it was time to use my voice. That's almost what I feel like. It was time to use my voice. When you said that, I wrote that down. Wow. Like every time I meet someone, something about them mirrors what I feel. It is
Hmm.
so interesting.
No, you're following the calling. I mean, that's an anointing by God, putting
I
you out
think
there and
so.
saying people are going to pay attention. So yeah,
I hope
it's really
so.
cool.
Yeah. It's for the right reasons, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Um, and I also believe that God doesn't do those things until you're ready.
Hmm. It
It's not on our time. It's on divine time. And
was
when you're
definitely on God's
ready,
time for me. Yeah.
right? And it's ready
Yeah.
to step up to the plate and do what you were brought here to do.
Yep. Make a
Oh
difference
my
for the
goodness.
kingdom. Yeah.
Oh, I got goosebumps. For others who are curious or even afraid of death, what would you want them to take away from your experience?
Gosh, for me, it's the comfort that you get knowing Jesus and knowing that there is more to this life. A lot of unbelievers get stuck because they can't make it work in their head. They can't figure out eternity, or they say, well, I'm going to put my faith in science instead of God because it's easier to explain, or it's easier for them to understand. But the thing that I realize is that we were not created with the ability to comprehend God or eternity or heaven or, a lot of this spiritual stuff. It's just foreign to us because we're just not, we're not enveloped in it all the time.
That's right.
Uh, and that's where faith comes in. But, yeah, just have faith.
What do you think about that when you say that? Like, we're always so busy trying to do. We forget about the small things. We forget about even a lot of times we forget about even ourselves.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
don't think personally we were supposed to be like that. I don't think we were supposed to live like that. How do you
No,
think personally did we get like this? And how did we forget about all the faith?
personally, I think that, it's Satan's plan, get us so busy and so distracted that we just don't have time for God. And a lot of it is pride too. A lot of people that just they don't want to drop their pride and say, okay, I will believe that there's a Jesus, there's God, God is real. Um, because Satan's filled them with the fact that they have much more knowledge than us stupid believers. Uh, Christianity is just a crutch for us. That's what they think. And they're just afraid to say, okay, I'm going to go at it, and I'm going to figure out the truth. I'm going to find the truth. There's a guy named Lee Strobel that was a reporter, and he was an atheist. And he was married to a believer, and he set out one day and he said, "Okay, I'm going to prove that my wife is a crackpot. That Christianity is not real. I'm going to prove it to her." And what happened? He took years, and he looked into Jesus, and now he's a believer, and he's a Christian author. So become a Lee Strobel, but you got to do it with an open mind and say, okay, God, if you're real, you know, I'm going to figure it out as much as you can without, because there is a certain amount of faith. You're never going to see God face to face. I mean, I was lucky because I had a answered prayer, Um, Not everybody's going to get that. They're not going to be able to meet a physical Jesus. But I think everybody can get to know his voice and talk to him and hear him for sure.
I just was just thinking about what you were saying about that. No, not everyone is going to get that chance.
Right.
That's very, very important. But, and we are so fortunate to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I forget how fortunate that is, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Can we please talk about your books, if you don't mind, or anything else that you're up to?
Yeah. So I wrote a book. It came out, I think it was about a month ago. First part of, I don't know, people see this podcast at different times, but it came out in beginning of September. It's called I Held the Hand of Jesus in Heaven. And it's the story um, that was prompted by God saying, tell the whole story. Tell it now, tell the whole story. Hold nothing back. The world's ready, and so are you. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna write it. The first one that I wrote was called Accidental Heaven. It did really well. I self-published that because I just thought, I just figured I'm kind of trying to please God by saying, yeah, okay, everybody's gonna hear my story, but I just really wasn't into it. I mean, it was a fun story to write and to kind of relive it all. But this one this one's from the heart, and it's got a lot of stories in there about how I hear the voice of God, how you can hear the voice of God, building relationships. And then there's actually one part, uh, one 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 chapter that just looks at all the reasons, the comments that I've gotten through the years, that have said it happened, it was only this, or it was just a dream, it was just this. And so I go through every single one of those and just tell why it was real, why those don't make any sense.
Yeah, people can be quite different. I don't pay any mind to those comments, to be honest. I had people getting on me because I had my Buddha statue. I mean, um, I like the decor. It's a decor piece. It's actually from my garden. It means I just have things that are around me that are peaceful. And
Mhm.
somebody really got angry with me because I had it there. But it's decor. A lot of people have these in their homes and gardens. It doesn't mean anything about what I believe in, so, but sometimes it's wasted air. Like, why make a comment that's not kind? Like, I don't understand why even bother.
Well,
I don't
that's the
understand it.
internet.
Yeah, I just don't. Like,
Yeah,
what is the point of even doing
I
that?
know.
But I get it. I've gotten a few myself, and that's okay. I've got a strong backbone, right?
Yeah.
Mike, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to actually show up and tell your story. It is absolutely beautiful. Um, I don't know how anybody could even question. I really don't. But I would really like to thank you so, so very much for your profound story. It's not easy to revisit such a transformative and vulnerable experience, but your willingness to do so is a gift to all of us. Your story reminds us that there is so much more to this journey we can never truly imagine, and perhaps more hope, love, and connection on the other side than we even realize. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
And to everyone listening today or watching, may this experience remind you that there's more about our existence that lies just beyond the boundaries of what we can see and touch. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of The Returned. And if this conversation moved you or sparked something within you, I invite you to like, subscribe, and share with someone who may need to hear this today. And until next time, stay open, stay curious, and keep returning to the truth within you.